We all would love to have the most colorful fish in the hobby in our tanks, but sometimes color comes with the cost. I'm Tyler Huxford, and today we're going to be talking all about one of my favorite fish, which is the powder blue or even the powder brown tangs. These two fish are honestly two of the most beautiful fish in our hobbies, but they're also incredibly polarizing fish in our hobbies. There's a lot of strong opinions either way on whether or not these are absolute champions for a tank or if they're absolute liabilities. And regardless of that, I just personally believe that there are absolutely a few things that you should know before purchasing a powder blue or a powder brown tang for your tank. So today we'll cover the basics and then talk about some of the unique characteristics of these fish that you're absolutely going to want to know before buying a powder blue or a powder brown tang. So today we'll cover what these guys eat, how big these fish are expected to grow, the kind of tank you'll need to ensure that you're having success in housing these fish. We'll talk a little bit about the husbandry compatible tank mates for these fish, what works and what absolutely does not. And then finally, some unique factors for both of these fish that you're absolutely going to want to know before making this purchase. So we all know how beautiful these fish are. I personally have a powder blue tank currently in the 125-gallon tank that you see behind me. They have the black masks, the deep blue pattern all along the body, and then they have the ridiculously beautiful contrasting yellow fins on the top. These are a beautiful fish to behold. As for what these guys eat, these fish are like most tangs in that they essentially become hippos for your little tank. They'll eat just about anything. Meats, treats, pellets, flakes, but especially greens. If you look up the actual diet of these fish in the wild, these are absolutely herbivore fish. While they will eat the shrimp, the mysis, the brine, they really should be eating a lot of greens. And that's important for these fish for a couple of reasons. One, it's going to reduce their susceptibility to disease. Tangs just in general are very susceptible to disease, and it's important that they get their vitamins to ensure that they can become disease resilient. But it also helps in reducing the aggression of these fish, which, by the way, the powder blue and the powder brown tangs are aggressive like most tangs. If I were to put these fish on a spectrum of aggressivity, these would absolutely be on the highest end of aggression when it comes to tangs. But feeding these fish a lot of greens, a nori clip here and there, can actually reduce aggression with these fish amongst the other tangs in your tank. These fish also happen to be an incredible algae grazer. So if you've got algae issues in your tank, or else you're just looking for a utility fish to maintain algae levels low, this is a great fish to go with. By the way, if you're interested in other utility fish, I've already made a video, which I'll put right here, which showcases the best utility fish in my experience, in my opinion, for keeping algae levels down. These fish absolutely make the list. And we talked a little bit about how these guys like to eat varied diets. We also talked about how essentially they become hippos and usually eat great. But the harsh reality is that upon purchasing these fish, these guys can actually be very picky eaters. So a new powder blue or powder brown tang, when introduced to your tank, might not eat much at all. So it's important to know when purchasing a powder blue or a powder brown tang, either from a local fish store or from online, you're going to want to have a variety of foods to rely on. That way, if your fish isn't eating and is deciding to be picky, maybe the stress levels are still a little high, you'll have a variety of foods that you can try so that he's eating something. Healthy eating is one of the best ways we can reduce overall stress in a fish, and by reducing stress, we're increasing disease resilience. So make sure you have lots of foods to try when introducing this fish to the tank. Eventually, a healthy powder blue or powder brown tang will eat anything. That being said, because of their healthy diets, a healthy powder tang will grow and will grow fast. So these fish can grow up to 9 inches long. I personally have never seen either a powder blue or a powder brown tang that size, but they can get up to 9 inches, and it's not a good idea to house these fish in anything smaller than a 125-gallon tank. I would even say that if you're planning on housing these fish with any other tangs in a tank, you're going to want a tank that is larger than 125 gallons, as these fish become very territorial, especially towards other tangs. You're also going to want to have plenty of rock work for these fish to naturally graze on. That's one of the other areas where they can get their vitamins through greens, through the algae growing in your tank. They'll do a phenomenal job, once again, of keeping that down. But it also ensures that they have hiding places that they can go to. Tangs kind of need that. The more hiding places that you have for them to either sleep or hide while they're stressed out, the lower you can reduce those stress levels. These fish, often if they feel like they're swimming in a tank that is too open for them and they don't have the hiding places they need, can often become just a little more stressed out, which leads to disease issues either down the road or right when you're getting started, which is another challenging aspect of these fish, which we'll talk about here just in a minute. So at least a 125-gallon tank. Realistically, with other tanks, you're going to want a tank even bigger than that. But as far as husbandry goes, one of the things that you cannot do is put one of these fish with another fish of the acanthus family. So we're not talking about tangs in general here. I, for example, in the tank you see behind me, do have a powder blue tang who's housed with a blue tang. I also have a purple tang, and I also have a yellow tang. So 2 zebrosomas there. But I only have one fish that is acanthus in this tank. I actually have a mimic tang, which I bought for the specific purpose of keeping algae down, in my 40-gallon tang in the living room. I bought that tang while it was in its juvenile state and still pretty small, and was planning on putting it in this tank just as soon as it outgrew that 40-gallon tank. However, within 30 seconds of me putting the mimic tang in this tank, the powder blue tang made its way over to that fish and started beating the heck out of it. I've honestly never seen a fish beat up on a fish quite like this powder blue tang beat up on this mimic tang, but honestly, I had to remove the fish after about 4 hours of them being together in the tank. The aggression did not stop, and honestly, the fish would have died probably with just 2 more hours of being in the tank. I was able to save that fish, but now I have to find another place to put that fish as he outgrows the 40-gallon tank, because I'm not going to be able to put him in here. Some of the other popular tangs in the acanthus family are the mimic tang, but also the Achilles tang, the powder brown tang, and the convict tang. If you're planning on having any more than one of these, you're going to need an extremely large tank, and realistically, you probably shouldn't even try it. They will not get along. Not only that, but powder blue tangs do tend to assert dominance on other tangs in the tank, but they don't single them out necessarily like they would another acanthus fish. Outside of the tang family though, these fish are rather peacekeeping in my experience. They're also a fish that can hold their own. Since they've got that scalpel on the back of their tails, they can defend themselves pretty well, which means a fish like this actually could do pretty well in a predator tank, even though these guys are not regarded as predators. So if you have a predator tank, you could introduce a powder blue tang. They also do great in reef tanks. This is a reef-safe fish here, folks. You gotta take advantage of the beautiful reef-safe fish that are out there, because there's not many of them. As far as specifics for this fish, a couple of things to know. First is, this is one of those fish that I honestly don't have a preference as far as purchasing a juvenile powder blue tang, a small fish. That's what I did here. I bought a powder blue tang that was about 2 inches in width, and he's already grown to 4 or 5 inches. This is definitely the fastest growing fish in my entire tank. He started out as the smallest tang in the tank. He was also the last tang I introduced in the tank. Nobody picked on him, and he's absolutely grown into the alpha of the tank now and is the largest tang in the tank. But they can also do really well being introduced into the tank as large tangs. That's totally fine, but a couple of things you need to be aware of. These fish, more than any fish, are known for being the ick magnet in a home aquarium. Whereas just about any tang is disease susceptible, because tangs have especially thin slime coats which protect them from disease, powder blue tangs are known even more for being disease susceptible. In fact, it's very rare that I've ever seen a newly purchased powder blue or powder brown tang not show signs of ick immediately upon being introduced to a tank. That's really important for both new and experienced hobbyists to keep in mind. That means if you're introducing a powder blue tang as one of your first fish, even if the powder blue tank gets to a point where you see no more white spots, every new fish you introduce to a tank can potentially get your once healthy powder blue tang sick. It's also important to realize that if you have a healthy tank full of healthy fish that you want to keep alive, realistically, you need to expect that by introducing a powder blue tang, you're going to be introducing some form of white spot disease, whether that's marine velvet or marine ick. It's always important, and something that I recommend, to quarantine and run a proper acclimation process for any new fish going into a tank. For powder blue tang specifically, you might consider being just a little more thorough in introducing this fish to the tank. You might also be just a little more thorough in any fish that you introduce to the tank after a powder blue tang. That being said, I absolutely recommend to anyone that this be one of the final fish that you introduce to a tank so that the powder blue tang feels like the new kid on the block, because it's not going to take very long before that fish eventually becomes an alpha or the alpha in your tank. You need to also expect that he's going to be a bully to any other tangs you've got in the tank, so you want to make sure that those fish are prepared to have a bully in the tank who could potentially be picking on them. But because they are so ick susceptible, I do recommend a few other things that I feel every tank with a powder blue or powder brown tang should have. I believe any tank that has a powder blue or a powder brown tang should have a UV sterilizer, which you can turn on in the event that any white spots do start to show up on your fish. I also don't necessarily recommend this fish to new hobbyists, not because this fish is difficult to take care of, but often because new tanks don't have the bacteria requirements to fight against parasitic diseases such as marine ick. So as you're preparing for a powder tang purchase, a couple of things to consider. Make sure you have multiple foods to try out to make sure that you can help a finicky eater become an eating champion. Make sure that you have a large enough tank to sustain a fish that realistically can grow to about 9 inches of length. Make sure that you don't have any other fish of the Acanthus family in your tank, as one of them is likely to kill the other. And make sure that you have a tank that can help a fish reduce its stress, meaning that there's plenty of hiding environments, there's plenty of natural food for the fish to pick at in the tank, and there aren't already any bullies that would single out this fish upon getting started in your tank either. If you follow these protocols, this can be an absolutely delightful fish to have in your tank. If not, honestly, this is a dice roll. This is a fish that could beat up on your other fish. This is a fish that could kill your other fish. This is a fish that could get your other fish sick. And this is also a fish that other fish could get sick. That's it for today's video. Hopefully you liked today's content. If you did, go ahead and like and subscribe. Don't forget about the giveaway that's coming up at 5,000 subscribers. At 5,000 subscribers, we will be drawing names for anybody who has commented on any of my fish or reefing videos. Holy Grail. The winner of that drawing is going to have a Holy Grail torch sent directly to their door. So take advantage of that giveaway, folks. Enter into that drawing and join the Red Reefer family here, folks. We'll see you next week in next week's video, folks. Happy reefing out there.